Hey 2D Design, good to see you. Hopefully steps 1 through 7 have gone well for our current project. I'm just going to real quickly kind of show you as a recap, but the title of the project being Marks and Lines, a portrait project, or using the mark as a metaphor for ourself. Okay, so what we were asked to do was to come up with a 2-word concept that described us. One word and then its opposite. And then we were going to go through and find some images on our Pinterest board or beyond, if you found them, in your Instagrams or wherever else is fine. And I asked you to see if you could figure out what these words were that maybe could describe the imagery. So for example, this piece here we said was overwhelmed, stressed out, bold, or strong. So the idea is, how can we make a design that does have some imagery, like a portrait, but to use the mark making, the way that we do the design, to help communicate that kind of message or tone or temperament to the viewer. So I had you do that a couple times, and the ones that I have received so far look so good. There's a link for examples on our Pinterest board. Then I asked you to think about your mark making for your words. I put in an example board where you could find different kinds of mark making. But for my example in the unit module, I talked about playful and stressed out. So trying to find some different kinds of marks. There's the example board. And then I asked you, with the materials in your kit, to try and make some of your own marks that emulated that kind of feeling. If you want to dive into your paints, you can, but if you feel a little overwhelmed, you could wait and you could just use the dry materials and the paint markers and stuff like that. But this example, we had just a really kind of raw approach with the acrylic. This was marker, and then with the black acrylic. I asked you to do a little more visual research, that maybe these could give you a jumping off point to work from, but they're really just to keep thinking about the words and how those things could be visualized. So they may or may not come into play, but just in the back of your head, helping you build out what your design might be. I asked you then to look at the visual elements and principles design in our glossary of terms and come up with some plans for your own. Then I asked you to find a picture of yourself, to take a picture or to find one that you have. Also mentioned if you felt stressed out about doing a self-portrait, you could do someone else that you know. But to try and have it be high contrast and good information, which I'm going to show you a picture in just a second, what I mean by that. And then this was the last step we left off at, was where I had you guys make some little compositional studies. But here's where it's going to come all together in step 8, where we're going to put it together. So because this isn't a drawing class, we don't necessarily have to draw a portrait. We'll use that trace and transfer method that we used before. So I took a picture of me, and in my phone editor, I turned it to black and white, and then I bumped the contrast way up and tried to make it so there was some good source information. And here's where the trace and transfer comes in for this. You can either choose to use your tracing paper. Well, let me back up. You can choose to do a trace and transfer like we did in the last project, where you printed it. I don't know if you can see this, but there is line drawing on there. And I put mark making material on the back and then started to trace it onto my good mixed media board, the 11 by 14 mixed media board. So you can do that method that we did in the last project just fine. But if you wanted to do it a little differently, or to have some options, you can use your tracing paper and you can then make a drawing that way. So look at the difference between these. This is the same photo, and then that is the tracing for this one, where I went in and like really tried to render and follow the lights and darks and so forth. So it looks a little bit more like the photo, but this one, the mark making was really more gestural and linear and illustrative, kind of like a contour study, broken continuous line contour study. So you can do a couple of those if you want to kind of feel out different ways to approach it. Then, based on your compositional studies, you can decide where and how you're going to put that information in the final piece. So the idea is to do a trace and transfer of the portrait, and then you can use your mark making in different ways. You only have to do one, but have a couple different examples. And they shouldn't take very long because of the trace and transfer, and then it's the designing part that becomes fun in examples like these. Here is a student that did one, but he actually chose not to do just the face, so it's a little different, but they're pretty cool how they turned out. So he used this really wild mark making to do his silhouette. And he did it 3 different times. And they're pictures of him. I like these two together because they're the same pose. Isn't that cool? But it was his black acrylic just being used in a kind of painterly fashion. The way that he did this is he took the tracing paper of his figure, drew it out, and then was able to paint, around it and remove the tracing paper. So like a stencil. I also wanted to show you these really quickly. These are from a Pinterest board. Oops. But just to show how different you can choose to make them. Like this example, the mark making is so frantic and frenetic and pretty lovely. But this one, it's a lot more graphic and kind of slowed down and stylized. So it's like making these cool little illustrations. Okay, I have one more thing I wanted to talk about, kind of where this trace and transfer comes from. So a lot of the illustrations that you're seeing in our Pinterest board, where you see these kind of fun portraits, some of them are drawn from life, but a lot of them are probably done this way. So here I'm in the application called Procreate, but this could be turned into any program like Illustrator or Photoshop, different things where you can build a layer. So here is my picture on the first layer. And here's the layers here. And I'm going to turn on layer 2, 3. Here we go. And I did a line drawing like tracing paper, but I did it digitally. And I'll turn off the picture layer. And that's kind of what we're doing, right? So that's how a lot of our digital artists do it. They'll have the one layer with the real picture draw on top and then throw away the layer underneath. So we're doing that same thing. We're just doing it analog instead of digital. So I'm really excited to see how your projects turn out. Again, you have lots of paper that you can use for this project to get before we get through all the projects in the class. So if you wanted to do it a couple times, you can, because they're fun to make. And then you can kind of see how the different mark making affects it in different ways. But you just have to do the one. Okay, I am looking forward to seeing everybody's final projects. The 1 through 7 steps look great so far. And let me know if you have any questions. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.